please introduce yourself and tell us how you got into the field in the first place.
Okay. Well, my name is Jay Harriman, and I've been a member of AECT, and also, I guess, by virtue of that, been in the field for at least since the mid-70s. I had begun my academic career in college as a music major because I came from a family of music educators, so I just assumed I was going to follow the same path that my mother and father did. But that really wasn't for me, and I had spent much of my childhood and years after that making little movies and slide shows and thing, and I loved to go and watch, go to the local TV channel and watch what was going on there. So that instilled this curiosity and interest in media. So when I got to college and was not feeling that I was really gaining much by studying music, I was already playing. I walked into the bookstore one day and found out you could actually take courses and get a major in media and communications in the School of Journalism. So to make a long story short, my undergraduate is in radio, TV, film journalism, and I pursued some positions both during and after college in radio and television in the Atlanta, Georgia market as a on-air and also as a account executive selling ads, and then moved back to Athens and became a newspaper journalist and wrote stories and the like. But you know what got me one day is I got to thinking, you know, I'm working Christmas days an awful lot. And I thought to myself, this isn't great for the family, and I would enjoy those times I remember spending with the family who were music educators themselves, where we had some days off at Christmas and the like. How do I do that? It was a journalism professor that said, well, why don't you check out educational media? And I didn't even really know what that was or that it existed. And boy, that really, because it spoke to me when I started to explore it. Because not only did I have this interest in media and communications, but I also had a passion for what good education was. I'd already experienced some professors, as I guess all of us probably have along the way, there are a few of them, that just don't inspire us, or we don't look at them as models of great. So there has to be a better way. And when I started looking into things like instructional design and writing objectives and so forth, I said, oh, they've got the plan here. And they've merged it with some philosophy. I said, this is for me. So I continued on with the master's degree, and towards the end of it, I took my first job. Well, that actually wasn't my first job. I worked for a time as a media specialist in the pharmacy school at the university. But then I moved to Atlanta to become the first, back to Atlanta. I was flip-flopping back and forth between Athens, Georgia, and Atlanta. And I became the first media director at Mercer University in Atlanta, and also taught a beginning foundations of media for the education department, for the teacher ed program. And through that, I felt, boy, this is great. But then as I was there, and I ultimately was promoted to an assistant professor, I got to thinking I would really like to create something on my own. And so to make a long story short, I created the first communications program, academic program there, and became the first department head. And it grew to be the third largest enrollment in the basically a liberal arts college. And then they got to say, well, now, are you going to be working on your doctorate anytime soon? And I said, I hadn't thought about that. So I began exploring what I might do, but my path, as maybe this is beginning to reveal, has been somewhat eclectic. The two main, or maybe the three main themes are education, communications, and I just lost what the third one was, but it'll probably emerge here in a minute. But I said, I don't necessarily want another degree that's primarily media and technology related. So I looked around and I thought, you know, the field of adult education interests me, and I did some exploration there. So I enrolled in, or was admitted to the doctoral program in adult education, but found a way to, because of their flexibility and the kinds of research and the kinds of studies you could do, focused it on adults learning from media, from television at the time mainly. And we would write not quite, but about to get to that area where the internet or computers were becoming much more prevalent. So I stayed on at Mercer for a number of years as a teacher of communications classes, and as well as education, and was in both departments. And ultimately, there was some transitions that occurred at the university, and it was necessary for me to start searching for something else after 15 years. And I went and got a couple of offers, but by this time my family had grown considerably. I have 4 kids, and the best opportunity was something I saw written in a newspaper about at a private school. Now, I'd never really been in the realm of K-12. I'd always been higher ed. But I thought, now this is intriguing. They had built a partnership with a German foundation that was really looking at technology and media literacy education. And I said, oh, that sounds right up my alley in 2 areas. So I explored that, and they brought me in as a consultant. I went with them to Germany a number of times, the leadership of the school. And ultimately, they had me write my job description, and I said, this is going to be fun and something different. And so I was there for several years and got my feet wet in K-12 and led the library media center and those programs, and did some faculty development with what media education, media literacy education had to do with everything. Then I finally said, you know, I think I want to go back in the university setting. So I went to the University of Georgia to become director of what was called the Instructional Resource Center at the time. But it was also partnered with the Faculty Development Center. And I said, well, there's an area I would like to be involved with. And became the director. But ultimately, we merged those two to be one department. And so I was now the associate director for the what was called the Office of Instructional Development. And I left there to go to, for a number of reasons, Florida, where I became the director, because I wanted to do more in faculty development myself, lead it. And I spent several years in Florida, living at the beach, which was always one of my dreams. Do that, but it kept me away from my family a good bit. But I'd travel back and forth, and then ultimately I finally finished up, which I think is one of your questions, in Brazil, because I had been part of a project that the Department of Instructional Technology at Georgia had with this Brazilian, and I'd actually gone down there in 2000 and given a presentation, so they knew me, but unbeknownst to me, a doctoral student from Brazil was working on with his faculty advisor to get a grant to exchange students from Brazil to U.S. and vice versa. I said, boy, that's intriguing. And I'd had the international exposure with the German program at Athens at the academy. So I went there, moved there to Brazil, and stayed several years. So my last job, quote, was as an English instructor and also I think they called me sector coordinator of audiovisual, which actually meant that I was in charge of video preparation for their online courses that they produce for the, well, literally for the whole country of Brazil, from this federal university in Fortaleza, Brazil, called the Virtual Institute. Now that's long-winded, but you can see it's been sort of an eclectic career. Would you like me to speak to AECT and how that fit in along the way?
Yes, that would be
because what an incredible influence. Because when I was in Miami from the very beginning, I would sit in this huge auditorium with these thousands of people attending those conventions, which were quite large back then, and look up on stage at these people and say, gosh, way out, you know, who would ever thunk that one day I'd be president of it, which I think probably there's a message there for any of our students coming in today, whether as interns or just for their first time, this is an organization that is open and always has been to getting people involved. And no job is too great or too small. I've been president. Today at our conference here, I'm waving flags to guide people to the roundtable sessions to get them there. But the influences of people who not only are leaders in the field, like, you know, people at the time that I was just getting into it, like Heineck and the rest of the folks from Indiana and the like, you know, it was required reading and part of our coursework. I remember seeing Gagne in Miami. Boy, what a full room. But all those things, and actually seeing those people come alive that had been your textbooks and telling you what they're doing. Well, you're going to have to stop me or I'll just ramble on here.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's part of the history of AECT, and you've lived it, and that's
well,
excellent.
I think probably the one message is there were, and I hope still are, avenues for getting involved like we had. I don't think I would have ever risen to the leadership I have if it hadn't been for the State Affiliate Association, which I think were probably a lot stronger, or at the time in the 80s. I was president of the Georgia Association for Instructional Technology, and we had the Atlanta Convention for AECT coming, and back then the state affiliate was essentially responsible for the volunteers and the helping to manage the day-to-day operations of the convention. But through that is how I guess I got known and kind of rose up through various committees and over the years. And so along the way, and you ask about what influences, many of the, I wouldn't even want to single out one person because so many. I come back and I even see them here today at the convention and think, gosh, for what they meant for my career.
Yes, and along with that, were there certain theories or avenues of research or work or practicing that really, you did mention the media always, but were there particular areas that you really felt?
Well, I think as the opportunities came along to hear about design and, well, a case in point, I had not really known that there was so much research being done on media education and media literacy and how and involving students and learning the skills and the concepts of what they can do to analyze what they're seeing on television or in the movies and be able to talk about a variety of factors that most people don't even think about. They just absorb. Yes. That could, in essence, have an influence on their own learning in other areas as well, because they were becoming critical thinkers, if you will, perhaps an overused term. But that was always intriguing to me. Most of my, some writing that I've done, and it hasn't been that prolific, I wouldn't not call myself a hard researcher by any means, but the things that I've written have had to do with faculty development, merging faculty development with other services on various kinds of campuses and how those relationships work. And also noting, you know, what that we looked at one point in time with distance education, and that was always a part of what I did with things like correspondence courses going way back that are applicable even today with online learning, and certainly the nature of the learner was always important, you know, because I began to see that there was such a need to make sure that those who chose to take that kind of learning approach, where they would not be other directed in a classroom, and how they would be having to take charge of their own learning in many cases, develop their own schedules. Did they have the personality traits? So there were a number of instruments out there, field dependence, field independence, many of those kinds of things. The one that I focused on was self-directed learning, which had not been linked so much to distance education, but it seemed to embody many of the traits and attributes that learners would need to have. So I tested the the scale that was actually developed at the same department that I was attending. And I said, well, I'm going to try this out with a group of collegiate classes that are doing this kind of thing to see if it has any can predict any kind of success or the like. And so I've always tried to keep up with that to see where the research is leading us in self-direction.
That's fascinating. And would you say that, what would you characterize as your greatest accomplishments through your career?
Probably keeping a family of 4 kids together, and I know that's not the answer, but you know, that has to be part of what we do, and particularly those who are studying at the doctoral level, which is a lot here now, what AECT has become. And it was a challenge for me, you know, at the time. You know, if you've done it, you know the things that you're putting aside, the sacrifices that your family's making, and the like. Mm-hmm. So I think I consider that accomplishment. It wasn't always easy, and wasn't always successful, if you will, but obviously the things like rising to be president of AECT was something that I considered an accomplishment. The creation of an academic program from somebody who had no business proposing one to a faculty curriculum committee.
Wonderful, yeah.
And in fact, they looked at it and said, really? You haven't even started your doctoral program. But they liked the concept because it wasn't just let's create a bunch of courses. It was somewhat novel, I guess. It was interdisciplinary. I was drawing among things that kind of already existed and brought different fields, like interpersonal communications and English, certain kinds of film studies courses, and things they were studying in sociology and psychology, along with some of the hard production courses and the like that we were already teaching under education. So that exposed these students to a variety of career possibilities. So that leads me to what might be an accomplishment. I'm always, and I never think I had anything to do with it, but it's always great to hear students get up, or people I've known years ago, and say, you know, he helped me do this, or if it weren't for him, I would never have changed. You know, so that's always music to my ears when I hear that kind of thing. It sort of validates, you know, what you've done and why you chose to do it.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And just a sort of an aside, you mentioned interpersonal communications. In 2004, I interviewed Don Ely, and he said he felt like that was one area that we used to have very strong handle on, but we've kind of moved away from it and haven't emphasized it as much anymore. What would you say to that as far as the...
Well, I don't see the emphasis a lot in a lot of curriculum. I don't see a whole lot of writing about it like there used to be. Now, a fellow at the institution that I worked at Mercer, actually he got his doctorate in adult education. That may have been an influence also that moved me that way, kind of away from just another degree in media and technology. Not to diminish that, you understand, but I was always looking for something different. I was not following the, I'm going to be a professor, I got to do this, I want to be tenure track, that didn't matter to me. If I could teach along the way, great. If I could be in different kinds of settings. So if you're going to describe who I am and what I do, it's not a that kind of a career. It's
not a typical career path.
Let's do this. At the same time, I wouldn't say it was haphazard. Everything that I did kind of led to, and I guess that's accomplishment, although I probably didn't realize it at that time. That doing all these things kind of gave me some growth and some things I could say to potential employers or whatever. I've done this, I've done, oh yeah, well that could be helpful here. As it turned out to be, I'd never taught in a K-12 school before, but it was great, and it gave me my first introduction to that, and the international travel and the working with a whole group of educators from Germany. You know, you can never feel something as great as having one of your new colleagues from another country go with you into the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. after a big meeting we had, and he wants me to help him look up his dissertation from Germany. And lo and behold, after we went into that big reading room where the card catalog is, there it was. And he was so taken back by that at the time. Now, of course, in today's, everything's on computer, but we literally went through the card catalog and found his dissertation.
That is something to.
But to answer your question, Jerry and I, and I'm talking about Jerry Zeller, he had a novel idea that what we will do is bring the students in, and we will give them roles. And then we'll tell them things that they're going to do that could influence how somebody else in that meeting will respond, and based on the kinds of behaviors. And so we wrote some things about that, and we videotaped it. And then later the students would have to look at those and go back and find where those cues, where those behaviors were happening, and what kind of influence they saw among the people they were talking with around the table. But I haven't seen as much about that anymore, so I kind of agree with you there.
Yeah, and it's so important, just teamwork as well as working with subject matter experts and other things like that. It's a real essential skill.
But the organization, if I could just make one comment about that, it's changed. There was a time, and you can go back and even look at some of the older videos in this project that you're working on, and you'll hear where it actually merged from things like hardware primarily, and some software, films, the military. All that history is so important, though, to go back and see where we came from and how is it applicable today. Are we reinventing the wheel? Have we seen this before? We've got different, or is there something unique? And certainly there is, because the very nature of the technology we work with is different. So another thing that I failed to mention is working with students. My intro to ACT probably was getting involved with their International Student Media Festival, because I felt strongly about students thinking of myself as a kid doing that. Of course, I didn't grow up to be Steven Spielberg, but he did the same thing. Made those movies as a child. But that was really where that came about, and that was what led me into doing more with the AECT. That was probably the first thing I really worked on, was the Student Media Festival. But then having the other opportunities, but it's changed, and there's nothing wrong with change. We are the oldest organization in the field, and you go all the way back to, I think it's 23 or 1923 when it was, I hope I don't have that date wrong. But what it is today, there's nothing wrong with that. We didn't have the competition in the 60s and the 70s, and all these other organizations are now meeting the needs of different constituencies that are either in education or communications.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. Let me look here, and you have touched on many of the changes in the field over the time. How do you have any favorite AECT memories or stories that?
Yes, but I couldn't tell them. I'd have to kill you.
That's great.
No, there have. I think what could be summed up about those stories, we'll protect the innocent and the guilty here, is that they were part of what this organization has always been to me, and I know a number of my friends and colleagues along the way, is where you've heard the statement, we work hard and we play hard. And the notion that we are just coming here to not get to know each other on a personal level, but some of my best friends and a lot have been involved with this organization over the years. Some are not here anymore, and possibly because it doesn't address their needs like it used to at one time, and that's too bad, but that's what happens when you have change. There's nothing I can say that other than to say that this idea of building community and building networks of friends that are unofficial, but there is one from Dallas, Texas. It sounds like I'm getting ready to do a Kennedy documentary. We had an AECT convention there, and several of us, and I may have mentioned this, that the state affiliate used to be charged with hosting the conference and organizing all the volunteer support. And when we four of us who had begun to be noticed were asked to be part of the planning group for the Atlanta convention, which followed Las Vegas. Now, what happens when you take a bunch of Georgians out of Georgia who've never been west and put them in Las Vegas? Anyway, the one thing that was said is at the time, the president-elect of the organization was Elaine Didier, and she walked into the planning meeting, and the four of us, neophytes, were sitting there amongst other colleagues who, some of them we obviously just didn't know. And she says, "Well, we can get started now. The Georgia Mafia is here." And we were struck by that. And so for the rest of the conference, we sort of bonded with other members of the Georgians who had come and some other friends, and just did everything together. And we went to eat, went to some shows and the like. And in the years that followed, as we kept coming to ACT, we would go out to dinner at least once. It didn't matter where, but just where we could get a big enough group. Well, the one in Dallas that I referenced was a major ice storm that hit right in the middle of the convention. And we had chosen a Mexican to go to that night. Well, needless to say, the cab drivers didn't even want to drive on the streets. It got so bad. And fortunately, I was in a car with some friends, and we just left, leaving a lot of people stranded, I'm ashamed to say, but there was no way we could get any more people in the car. And so we sort of adopted that the next year was going to be a reunion of that night and a Mexican. And so it stuck. Every year, the Georgia Mafia, as it began to grow. Now, you know, some of us weren't taking that seriously, but one woman just took it upon herself to become the self-proclaimed godmama of the organization, and she did, and that's a memory of how that evolved. It wasn't anything on the program, it wasn't anything, but many people, I began to see there as I was approaching my role as president, or president-elect, I guess, that, you know, that's an important thing, is to do whatever we can here to bring people together in ways. A lot of people find their own groups to hang out with, go to dinner, network, sit down and chat, but some will wander around. You know, they probably are alone, or they don't know anybody, or they're new, and so that's, to me, a very important part of what this organization. So that is, you know, kind of my fondest memory of how one evolved that just kind of took care of that for a lot of people for a long time. It no longer exists, but it does in our hearts and minds.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's good. Well, maybe you should organize an evening trip
to a Mexican restaurant. No, I'm retired now. Actually, somebody said they wanted to, I think there's a conference scheduled for Jacksonville again, and they're thinking, why don't we have a reunion there. I don't know if that will happen or not, but
that's good.
But there are a lot of side stories that are not suitable for all audiences, so I'm just going to leave that.
Stick with that one. That's great.
Yeah,
that's good. I think we have pretty well covered everything. Okay, one last question. How would you like to be remembered within the profession?
Well, I guess as someone who tried to do his best and tried to make a difference. Kind of a well-worn cliche, I know, but that was kind of, I go all the way back to when I said, you know, this is great fun being in TV stations and seeing all these stars that'll come in and out, but I wasn't making a difference, really. You know, it was commercial. Although I did work for a time in an educational station, But the idea of getting into schools or into educational settings and applying these skills and this knowledge about media and communication and helping people not only learn to operate and how to integrate into their teaching or into their learning, self-directed learning, if you will, also, is something that I'd like to be remembered as somebody who did try to make a difference in the organization and did the best I could.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed
Okay.
talking with you.